No! It cannot be!
Castlevania! A series I love and adore, but also something that's taken me way too long to talk about here on the channel. But we're finally doing it, with today's focus being Castlevania 2: Simon's Quest. For a big chunk of my life, this was one of those bad NES games, the ones that all the cool people with cool opinions on the internet said was bad. And yeah, it's pretty bad, but not like bad. Sure, there are things about this game that are clunky and outdated, needlessly archaic, sometimes thanks to a bad translation. But when I grew older, and when I finally actually became a Castlevania fan, largely in part due to the then upcoming release of Smash Ultimate and the incredible Netflix adaptation, the image of Simon's Quest I had in my head started to change. I mean, isn't this an open map game on the NES? Level up, solve puzzles, and find upgrades, all to gradually solve a puzzle box world map. Doesn't that sound awesome? It's like Zelda. It's like Metroid. Why don't people like this game? Damn it! One October a few years back, I sat down and I played this game with a guide. Then I played it again to get the best ending. And then I played it again. And again. And again. Okay, there might be something wrong with me. Over time, I kept coming back to this game again and again and again. I consumed this game. Flaws aside, I became weirdly enamored by Simon's Quest. My overall opinion of this game went from disinterest to fascination to appreciation. So now, as someone who loves the game, someone who wants to say they know quite a bit about it, and most importantly, someone who already knows the answers to all the puzzles, I come to you, dear viewer, to say, guys, come on. It's not that bad. It's fun, really. You're just giving it a bad rap. Those internet guys were just being inflammatory, and it's like, not even that confusing. Okay, no, there's definitely some grade A retro game bullshit here. That I cannot deny. But I'm not frustrated because this game can twist your balls sometimes. I'm frustrated because this game feels like it's so close to being something great. Like, there's some missteps, sure, but the foundation of a great game is right here. If the developers just did things a little bit differently, if the game had just a little more polish, with a few creative changes, I know this game could have been something special. Not just good, but truly great. Want to know how I know?
Thank you for giving me life!
I probably don't need to tell you that Symphony of the Night is so good that it blew my fingers clean off the first time I played it. Premium, monster-slaying, castle-exploring, kick-ass gothic horror action. This game is like crack. Immaculate PS1 vibes on display, with a soundtrack as atmospheric as it is blood-pumping, voice acting that sounds like it was recorded in a Transylvanian airport, and a gameplay formula so good that it redefined the series going forward, and literally helped name the genre. And this is what fascinates me most about Simon's Quest bad, Symphony good. At its core, these are the same game. Explore one big, interconnected map, gain abilities, and solve environmental puzzles until you find and achieve your ultimate goal. In fact, a bunch of series staples technically made their debut right here in Simon's Quest. Experience points, level ups, shops, currency, buying stronger equipment, sub-weapons you can freely equip from the menu, multiple endings. Koji Igarashi, co-director of Symphony of the Night, even credits Simon's Quest as a big inspiration for Symphony, and yet these two games stand on opposite ends of the spectrum of public reception. Why is that? That's what I want to answer in this video. By breaking down these games, I want for me and for everyone watching this to come away with a better understanding of what works and what doesn't. A better understanding of the game design of the Castlevania series. And I don't care how long ago October was, I'm gonna do it anyways! Okay, let's start with one of Soten's obvious advantages, one that Simon's Quest can't really be faulted for lacking. Symphony of the Night has 10 years of hindsight and all the power of the PlayStation 1.
Hey, plumber boy, mustache man, your worst nightmare has arrived.
Technology developed, the industry matured, game devs learned both from themselves and from others. If the devs were at all competent, and better yet, not rushed,
You steal men's souls and make them your slaves.
then of course Symphony was gonna be better than Simon's Quest. They would have known which mistakes to avoid, which systems to improve, and they would have had the hardware to do all the good stuff even better. More detail for the graphics, crazy 3D effects to play with, juicier sound effects, and CD quality audio. See, this is fine, but then you play this, and that makes this look like this. But let's not discount poor Simon's Quest. For the NES, I'd say this game has pretty good presentation. I think the sprites are detailed enough to read fine, and while the color palette doesn't pop as much compared to Castlevania's 1 and 3, I actually think the muddier palette fits better for the atmosphere of an exploration-based game. No, I'm not coping, that's not cope. And despite how small the soundtrack is, it's still full of bangers. Let's not forget that this is the game that gave us bloody tears. It's tricky because I don't know what parts of this game were due to hardware limitations and which parts were intentional creative decisions. I want to believe that the devs wanted to do more than just 3 boss fights total. I'm no expert on hardware, but at the very least, we know that an entire 6th mansion was cut from development. And if the cutting room floor is anything to go by, the devs put in a lot of work to translate the Famicom music into a format that worked on NES and sounds better in my opinion. But at the end of the day, we got what we got. Plenty of other NES games worked around their restrictions and are still beloved and don't suck. If Castlevania 2 wanted to be an exploration game, it could have made it work, so long as it had a strong foundation. So long as the gameplay was fun at a conceptual level. Okay, for the record, I think Simon's control scheme works. Sure, it feels kinda clunky, you got committed jump arcs and a lengthy startup on whip attacks. I'd actually say that controlling Simon isn't even necessarily fun, but it still works. It actually works really well. For Castlevania 1. Castlevania 1 is a difficult level-based platformer where the goal is just to get to the end of the level. It's not a maze, it's an obstacle course. The controls are tight, but also precise, and the levels are fun because they're designed around those controls. Every jump feels like a challenge, and enemies aren't just damage sponges, they're tests on when to jump and when it's safe to attack. You get locked into these actions because the game doesn't want you to just spam moves, it wants you to move with intention. Are you sure you want to make this jump? Are you sure you want to whip at this moment? Good Castlevania gameplay looks fun. It looks like a dance, and even just watching it makes me want to play it myself. Simon's Quest takes all that and throws it out the window. Simon's control scheme works because the level design works with it. If you want to do an exploration-based Castlevania, you can't just copy and paste the same movement because the movement's only half of what makes the game fun. You have to design the world around it. The systems need to work in harmony. So does Simon's Quest do that? How dare you ask me this? Castlevania 2's level design, in almost every regard, sucks. It's so bland, and there's no verticality. Almost every room in this game is functionally just a straight, flat hallway, and that's not good when Simon walks like he just woke up in the morning. Almost nothing tests the player's reaction, and no thought needs to go into when to jump or when to whip. One thing that's weird about Castlevania 2 is that, compared to the first game, there's like almost no stairs. I'd say that stairs are an integral part of Castlevania's level design, and yet they're just absent from like 90% of the game. And when they are present, they usually just deliver you to, oh hey, look at that, another hallway. Like surely there was a more interesting way to get Simon one screen down and one screen over that wasn't just one long staircase? And as for platforming, almost every jump in the game is boring as hell. Here, have the same 2-tile gap over and over again. Whenever you do come across a jump that's even a little interesting, it immediately overstays its welcome. Whoa, cool stupid spike jump 3 times. This rising platform over water is kinda neat, so why don't you do it 8 times in a row with no change? Okay, be honest with me. How does looking at these platforms make you feel? Because it makes me wish I were dead. Asking the player to explore a world and then making the world extremely boring is already one hell of a decision, but adding on top of that a clunky moveset that needs very deliberate design to work, and then not designing for it, leaves us with a game that at best feels awkward to traverse and at worst feels frustrating and unfair. You see, Symphony of the Night understood this, and instead of just copying over the movement from Rondo of Blood, the game it was designed as a sequel to, they instead gave Alucard a moveset that was much looser, the loosest we'd seen in the series so far. He has better air control, more freedom in how he attacks, and can backdash, which can be used to dodge or to cancel an animation he'd be committed to otherwise. When you get into the groove, controlling Alucard feels like second nature, and that lets the player focus on other things. When you don't have part of your brain relegated to steering duty at all times, you can actually focus entirely on things that matter. Focus on combat and exploration. Exploration of a map that's actually interesting. Another aspect of level design is how you use enemies. For example, in Castlevania 1, there's like only 2 rooms in the game that are just straight, flat hallways. Flatter than anything in Simon's Quest even. And yet they're both more interesting than anything Simon's Quest has to offer. One of them is like my favorite room in the game, and that's because the enemies themselves are the focus of these rooms. The player can't just ignore the enemies, they have to plan around what the enemies are doing. Enemies aren't just something you slap down in the level design, they are level design. They're incorporated into it. But I guess Simon's Quest didn't get the memo, because almost every enemy in this game walks slowly back and forth and is dealt with the same way every time. See, Symphony of the Night keeps its rooms interesting, with plenty of enemy variety that keeps the player on their toes. Some rooms are entirely vertical, and have enemies designed for vertical spaces. Almost every enemy has an attack where the player needs to jump, or duck, or anything other than just walk up and whip them to death. You know, Alucard actually walks pretty slowly in this game, but it's almost never an issue because he almost always has something to do. An enemy to dodge, or a platform to jump up to. The player is always engaged. My least favorite room in the game is this long, flat hallway in the marble gallery. There's not nearly enough enemy variety for how long it is, and it goes on just slightly too long. This room is boring for the same reasons that rooms in Simon's Quest are. It's unengaging. I'm just holding right. It leaves me wishing Alucard had a run button, even though in the other 99% of the game, he doesn't need one. But hey, at least you can get the Power of Wolf later on. Yeah! But what if the room was upside down? Oh, come on! Bottom line is, Castlevania 2 doesn't ask its players to make enough meaningful choices moment to moment, not nearly at the same rate that Symphony of the Night does. And that just makes the game feel not very exciting to play. Point for Symphony of the Night. But hey, a Metroidvania isn't just about the moment-to-moment gameplay. It's also about the bigger picture. The world map, the vast, intricate puzzle box that you spend the entire game untangling. Metroidvanias are all about when you find that new ability and go, oh, I know where to use that. Both Simon's Quest and Symphony of the Night's maps gradually open up as the player progresses, so let's compare. Does one do it better than the other? Well, that's kind of a complicated question. Let's start with map complexity. Symphony of the Night, and pretty much all 2D Metroidvanias for that matter, have you searching rooms up, down, left, and right, with maps that end up looking like ant farms. Simon's Quest, on the other hand, is basically a straight line, which is about as simple as you can get. But a map doesn't necessarily need to be complex to be fun or satisfying to solve. Instead, it boils down to how the map uses its locks and keys. And these locks and keys don't need to be literal locks and keys. A lock could be a ledge that you just barely can't reach, and the key would be an item that lets you double jump. It could be a grate that you can only pass through by turning into mist, and an ability that turns you into mist. I think the order in which you can get keys, how many locks each key can open, knowing where to find the next key, and even how apparent it is which locks and keys go together, are the main contributing factors to that feeling of getting lost in a Metroidvania. Do you know roughly where to go next, or do you need to try going places you haven't explored yet? Or maybe you just need to double check all the previous locks you haven't opened. Maybe you already have the key and just don't realize it. I think intentionally evoking this feeling is what a Metroidvania should strive for. But here's the thing. Even though both Simon's Quest and Symphony of the Night are built on this lock and key style of progression, these games, fundamentally, want to be explored in different ways. Symphony of the Night wants players to explore its world by getting lost in it. Alucard's initial goal is simply to investigate the castle, and later on to find Richter, but neither quest points you in any specific direction. Beating the game is as complicated as finding what room the final boss is in, and if the player keeps exploring beyond that, they'll naturally find the way to the true ending. In Symphony, simply exploring is the same as doing the main quest. In contrast, Simon's Quest doesn't want you to get lost in its world. I don't think it wants you to get lost at all. Town signs tell you the names of neighboring locations, and the Japanese instruction manual even had a map. No, the intended challenge comes from playing detective. See, there aren't any movement upgrades in this game, and all of the key items are relatively easy to find. Progression doesn't come from finding the keys, but figuring out how to use them. This game has towns, which are naturally filled with townspeople, and the player is expected to talk to NPCs to learn vaguely where to go, what to do, or where to find something important. Finding secret books will also give you vital information. Some people may actually give you information that's outright incorrect, but that isn't due to mistranslation. Not normally anyways. By design, some townsfolk are supposed to be unreliable. In Japanese, it's slightly more obvious if someone can be trusted or not based on how they speak, a detail which got lost in localization, but a warning about unreliable townspeople still made it into the English instruction manual. The intended structure of Castlevania 2 the way this game was meant to be played, is learning about rumors and checking for yourself if they're true or not exploration. These games have outright different approaches to player progression, so I can't really say if one game does exploration better than the other. I can only ask which game is better at accomplishing its respective approach. And, well, Symphony gets the point here again. Locking progression behind movement upgrades is just more logically intuitive. Anybody who finds an item that lets you double jump will immediately recognize that they can use it to reach areas they couldn't before. Simon's Quest, however, is based entirely on dialogue, and it fumbles itself in the process. I'm not saying that dialogue-based progression can't work, just that it requires extra care to execute well. You're kind of banking on hitting that middle ground, where your dialogue isn't so obvious that you're just telling players where to go, but it isn't so cryptic that it's completely unintelligible. Not to mention, if you base your progression system on dialogue, you're gonna end up with a lot of dialogue. More dialogue than the average person can remember. Unless the player is writing stuff down, they will forget stuff. By flooding the player's head with non-stop clue after clue, you're constantly pushing older clues out of their memory. And so if the player forgets an important clue and they need to go find it again, they have to backtrack to find that specific NPC again. Backtracking in a game where traversal isn't that fun. And remember, by design, half of the rumors are false. They wanted you to get tricked into doing pointless busy work and do more needless backtracking. At least in Symphony, when you go the wrong way, you still find upgrades. You still fight new enemies and see more locks and gain more experience, all while playing as a character that's actually, fun to control. But in Simon's Quest, finding a clue and marching your slow ass all the way over, only to realize your info is false, doesn't feel like progress. I don't feel like I'm solving a mystery. I feel like I'm having my time wasted. Maybe it would be an easier pill to swallow if the act of going from place to place was fun, but it's just not. Not enough to justify. It's actually kind of crazy how the level design, the controls, and the bad rumors, all of these mechanics, which already kind of suck on their own, all work together to actively make each other worse. Like, look, I'm using this whole point system framing device as a gimmick, but it's kind of bullshit, because if both games deserve a point, I would give them both one, but Simon's Quest really does just fumble it here. And it really doesn't help that by having a system so dependent on language, you open yourself up to mistranslation for other regions. One of the more notorious puzzles in this game is when you need to equip a red crystal and kneel at this cliff for a few seconds. The book that tells you to do this got mistranslated, and the part that tells you to kneel got lost.
What?
In fact, 4 out of the 13 clue books, which are all supposed to be 100% reliable, got mistranslated. And multiple NPC dialogues, which were supposed to be real hints, got butchered and unintentionally became more false rumors. Actually, Symphony of the Night only relied on dialogue for puzzle solving like twice, and go figure, one of them got mistranslated. A clue engraved on some rings to "where in clock room" accidentally became "where in clock tower," which is an entirely separate location. What's worse, the clock tower has these locked doors which can only be opened in a super obtuse way, and the player might think that they have something to do with the rings, but the two are completely unrelated. At least in the correct spot, the secret activates automatically as long as you're wearing the rings, so it's easier to stumble into it by accident than Castlevania 2's red crystal tornado. Man, I'm kind of bumming myself out here. I mean, I like Simon's Quest, and I always will, because there's something wrong with me. I always look past the game's flaws, so I guess I just forgot how bad it really is critically. I don't think it's that bad if you know what you're getting yourself into, but I can definitely see why some people would bounce off of this one after playing Castlevania 1. What else is there? Okay, stat progression. Both games have stat progression. This should be hard to screw up. Castlevania 2 was the first Castlevania to have experience points and a leveling system. It was brought back in Symphony and has been a series staple ever since. Kill enemies to level up and get stronger. Easy. The mechanic is very similar across both games, but there are some key differences. For starters, in Simon's Quest, you don't get experience from killing enemies, but from collecting enemy drops. In this game, you gain experience from hearts, so if the enemy doesn't drop a heart, no experience for you. It's little, but it does mean whether or not you even get experience is technically left up to chance. An unlucky player can kill hundreds of enemies and get nothing, but that's not my biggest problem with this mechanic. That would be how the designers discourage grinding. In a lot of games like Symphony, the experience required to reach the next level usually increases exponentially. You can keep fighting the same weak enemies to get EXP, but it'll start taking longer and longer to level up. This is to encourage the player to fight stronger enemies instead, since they give out more experience. In Symphony specifically, if Alucard is a higher level than the enemies, they'll give out even less EXP than usual. In fact, at a high enough level, every single enemy in the game will only give out 1 experience point. This is basic stuff. The entire system is designed to discourage grinding easy levels off of weak enemies, since that's not even necessarily fun. But the player still can if they want to, or are so unskilled that they feel they need to. Simon's Quest tries to do something similar, but what it comes up with is interesting? Heart drops across the game don't increase too dramatically, and experience required to level up doesn't increase exponentially either. Instead, every time Simon levels up, areas from the beginning of the game are programmed to stop giving out experience completely. So you can grind in the first area of the game, but once you go from level 0 to level 1, that's as high as your level's gonna get. It's very weird. I haven't really seen any other game ever do this. And I mean, the idea is the same. Both games want you to get stronger by fighting the tougher enemies instead of the weaker ones, but whereas Symphony's leveling system is easy to understand, Simon's Quest system fails by being extremely unintuitive. I mean, the English manual doesn't say that experience acquisition is dependent on location, and as of writing, even the level page on the Castlevania wiki incorrectly attributes halted EXP gain to a programming bug. Okay, so that's weird, but let's talk about what leveling up actually does. In Symphony of the Night, Alucard has a wide variety of stats, and while there is some randomness to it, the general idea is that leveling up raises all of Alucard's stats across the board. Even though it's just a small boost, leveling up will give you more health, more attack, more defense, and more luck, all in one fell swoop. And as you gain more and more levels, you really start to feel the difference. In Simon's Quest, there's really only 2 stats: hit points and strength, and leveling up only increases one of them: hit points. Leveling up gives you a longer health bar and grants you a free health refill, which is a nice bonus since the only other way to get health back is from churches and towns. This means that if you want to grind, the only stat you're really going to improve is your HP bar. Your strength, on the other hand, depends entirely on what weapon you have equipped. You start with the leather whip, but you can find merchants throughout the game selling stronger and stronger weapons. This is something Symphony also does. You can buy equipment from the game's only shop, the Master Librarian. But in Symphony, you can also get weapons as rare drops from enemies, and you can even just find some sitting around the castle out in the open. I think the key difference here is that in Symphony, you can find or buy better weapons. In Simon's Quest, you have to find and buy them. In Symphony, you're basically showered with weapons, and you only need to go out of your way if you want to get the really good stuff. In Simon's Quest, you have to make sure you have enough hearts, you have to know where the merchant who's selling the weapon you want even is, you have to walk all the way there, and you have to buy them. Doing this can feel like jumping through hoops, since there's no other way to upgrade your weapon in this game. As a whole, Symphony of the Night's unrestricted EXP system, and numerous ways to obtain better equipment, results in a lower skill floor, which makes the game accessible to more people. Simon's Quest is very rigid in how the player is even allowed to progress, and at times makes it difficult to even progress at all. But in true Simon's Quest fashion, these slightly flawed but passable gameplay mechanics are actively made worse via their attachment to one final system: game overs. Oh buddy, here we go. In Castlevania 2, when you lose all 3 lives, you get to keep your level, but you lose all the experience that you had towards the next level. And all of your money. Obviously, losing progress is a common punishment for getting a game over. Symphony of the Night forces you to reload your save, but at least there, the main penalty is loss of level progress. The game is basically telling the player, do it again, but do it better this time. But in Castlevania 2, you don't lose any progress. In fact, you usually respawn exactly where you died. The punishment is that you need to grind. Spend time regaining the money and experience that you just lost by running back and forth for an arbitrary amount of time before you can even continue playing. The player isn't being forced to improve here, or get a better understanding of the level design, they're put in time out. It's brutal. Oh, and in Symphony, you can at least get all your health back from save points. In Simon's Quest, you can refill your health at churches, but there's no way to refill your lives. The only way to refill your lives is to game over and hit continue, and then you get all 3 back. But since that'll wipe your experience and bankrupt you, your best option is to just find a good time to intentionally game over? It's literally optimal for the player to plan for a moment where you've just leveled up and you've emptied your wallet buying all the equipment you need coming up, and then just game over. Just throw Simon in the lake 3 times. Waterboard that motherfucker. So even the act of refilling your health and lives is a non-intuitive, time-consuming hassle. And that's the pattern I've noticed with Simon's Quest. there really is no one thing it does wrong. Instead, it's that every individual part is flawed in some way. I mean, if there was an obvious problem weighing Castlevania 2 down, then I wouldn't need to make this video. I could just say, did you know Simon's Quest sucks because of this reason, and I could fit the whole thing in a YouTube short. But no, the player control is just a bit too clunky. Stat progression is a tad too confusing. The level design is slightly boring. Game overs are slightly too harsh. Individually, these problems don't seem like they're worth fussing about, but it really is death by 1,000 paper cuts, isn't it? When every little detail is working against the player, the final product is a game that just feels like it doesn't want to be played. Compare that to a game where every detail feels like it's working with the player. A game where leveling up is simple and easy, the level design is interesting, the player character is just fun to control. Almost every spot on the map has something to find, and the player has options. In Symphony, it never feels like my time is being wasted. I think this is how you end up with two games that are conceptually very similar in a lot of ways, but when you play them, feel worlds apart. Like, it sounds stupid, but genuinely, Symphony of the Night is a great game because it's just great, and Simon's Quest could be better by just being better. And since this video is going to be so negatively focused on Simon's Quest, I want to reiterate that I love this game. I love going back to it, flaws and all, and I respect its place in Castlevania history. Back when this game first came out, it was actually received really well. And like I said before, Koji Igarashi used Simon's Quest as the basis for Symphony of the Night, a more refined take on an exploration-based Castlevania. This game would literally not exist without Simon's Quest. In the end, Castlevania 2's biggest crime was just being first. If only Simon's Quest had a second chance. Not just a remake, but a full-on reinterpretation. One that refines the systems and mechanics and brings it up to the quality of the other post-Symphony Castlevanias. Can you imagine a version of Simon's Quest like that? I can. I will now pitch to you some of my fan game ideas. Hey, no, come back, no, come on. Nobody, the door's already locked, come on. I'll try to keep this section brief because I didn't expect the analysis portion to be 11 pages, but if we want to make Simon's Quest more like later Castlevania games, how do we go about doing that? Well, for starters, a lot of game mechanics can be copied over directly. Get experience from enemies instead of hearts, and level ups increase the player's stats across the board. Also give Simon more than 2 stats. Churches are now save points, and there should also be save points outside of towns as well. Weapons, armors, and accessories can be purchased, dropped from enemies, or found throughout the map. Actually, some Castlevania games even have these Sunstone and Moonstone accessories, which only raise your stats based on playtime or real time depending on the game. But since Simon's Quest already has an in-game day-night cycle, I think these items could work off of that really naturally. We obviously need more enemy variety, which also means more than just 3 bosses. One thing I didn't touch on is that in Simon's Quest, the player needs to conquer 5 manors that house Dracula's body parts, but only 2 out of the 5 manors end in boss fights, one against Death and one against Carmilla. The other 3 manors, and honestly, even some locations outside of the manors, should have boss fights as well. Now that does beg the question of who or what will act as our new boss fights. Some easy picks would be the Giant Bat, Medusa, the Creature, and the Mummy, who are all recurring boss fights throughout the series. However, the reason these guys are special is because they're the bosses from the first Castlevania. If we're remaking the second Castlevania, then I think it's just too soon to rely on these guys again. Not to mention they all showed up again in Castlevania 3, so we should really let some other monsters have their time to shine. Plus, the Mummy already is in Castlevania 2 already, he was just downgraded to a common enemy. I mean, I guess Portrait of Ruin had Mummy and Mummy Man, but forget the Mummy, we're not using Mummy. Personally, if we're not coming up with original bosses, I think it would be best to pull from the other Simon-focused Castlevanias, like the Big Skull from Super Castlevania 4, or the Ice Wizard from Castlevania Chronicles. Movement upgrades need to be added and should play a big role in map progression. I think these kinds of upgrades are just what people have come to expect from Metroidvanias, and we can also rely on them to help build a more interesting game map. Actually, on the topic of the map, Castlevania Order of Ecclesia's game structure seems to be based heavily on Simon's Quest, with manors, a central town, and the main setting being the Transylvanian countryside. The plot is even just searching the manors for different parts of a Dracula-related thing. But Ecclesia broke Transylvania down into a bunch of smaller maps, which are accessed from a world map screen. And that approach would work just as well for Simon's Quest, but since it's already been done before, I don't want to just copy that wholesale. And personally, I just prefer the all-in-one style of map design like in Symphony of the Night and Dawn of Sorrow. Personally, I would go for that in our version of Simon's Quest, but the final map can stay shorter and wider. I think that'll help this map stand out compared to the rest of the Castlevania entries. To go about doing that, to help compress the map and build it up, I actually think you could use manors and towns more effectively. I mean, these were already the most vertical parts of the game, but instead of only keeping the entrances at ground level, you could have these locations exit out into higher or lower elevations, and I even think you could mirror certain areas to sort of fold the map in on itself. All that being said though, I don't think exploration should outright replace talking to townspeople for clues. Though I think the dialogue-based progression is conceptually flawed in many ways, it's still a core aspect of Castlevania 2's identity, so I don't want to do away with it. We could cut back on the number of false rumors, but I think so long as Simon is fun to control and exploration feels good, then extra backtracking won't be so bad. Instead of having a bunch of bad game mechanics make each other worse, you could have decent game mechanics made better by other great ones. Plus, you could totally get fun with this. You can do a lot more with the rumor system than what the Famicom version did. Like, don't let rumors just be false. Have some that are true, but just lead you in the wrong direction. You could have some lead to some optional equipment. Like, have someone say, I hear there's an important piece of armor over here, and then you could go and find it, and it's optional, and nice to have, but maybe just not as crucial as the well-meaning townsfolk believed. I think this will actually help all the townspeople feel more varied instead of just having some that are purely helpful and some that are like, why are you talking to me? Get the fuck out of my face. Like, Castlevania 2 just has helpers and assholes. A potential remake could help spruce that up. Actually, on the topic of assholes, you could have some rumors just be outright traps. Have some people give you instructions on how to get to places where strong boss fights wait to ambush you. You could even have some info be false, but still lead you in the right direction. A suspicious townsperson could trick you into finding a secret boss, but one that guards a mandatory upgrade. That way the player is tricked by false info, but they're still making progress. I think that's a better way to actually respect the player's time. Really, I think that's the best way you could summarize a potential remake. A version of Simon's Quest that actually respects the player's time. A while back, I made a little mock-up in GameMaker Studio, which I was going to use to help spruce up the visual presentation of this video, but this video has been in the works for technically more than a year because I kept writing and rewriting the script and eventually burned myself out for a long time. I was having a hard time envisioning what I wanted this video to even be, and I didn't want it to just be me pitching my fan game ideas for 10 minutes. I eventually settled on comparing Simon's Quest to Symphony and using that as the jumping off point to talk about possible fan game ideas towards the end of the video, but just the comparison angle alone ended up being enough to fill a whole video, and the script finally became something I was actually happy with. But even though this mock-up went largely unused, I think it was still my favorite part about writing this thing. It was the first thing I'd programmed in a long time, and still is my most recent personal project in game development. It felt really fun getting back into it, and actually gave me some kind of hope that maybe my ideal version of a Simon's Quest remake isn't just hypothetical. Maybe it's easier than I thought to make this game a potential reality. Maybe I'll start my fan game era soon. Who knows? 2026, Year of the Gamer. It's all something to consider for the future. For now, I just want to say, thanks for watching. Castlevania is such a kick-ass series, and it's criminal that Konami won't do anything with it. It's in kind of a similar situation as Mega Man, where we've been getting re-releases and collections, but are still waiting for something new, although since writing that into the script, we did finally get that Mega Man announcement. But at the very least, Igarashi did leave Konami and started his own legally distinct Castlevania, Bloodstained Ritual of the Night. I actually still haven't played that one yet, because I wanted to play all the other Castlevanias first, but one day. And if this video gets at least one person to try playing Castlevania or Bloodstained, I'll consider that a win. Start with Symphony of the Night or Aria of Sorrow. Those are the best ones to start with, though Portrait of Ruin is actually my personal favorite. Really, I just hope you guys liked this video, and if you want to hear more, please consider subscribing. For some reason, this video took so long to make. It took so many different forms until it was finally something I was proud of, so if you genuinely made it all the way to the end of this thing, however it turns out, then really all I can say is thank you for watching. It really does mean a lot to me. Happy Halloween!